special day. Happy Martin Luther King Day. It's Izon, Oregon, and we are here live, and wanted to just give a quick mention to King and his legacy. He was one of our nation's greatest advocates for racial and economic justice. And there was a really great article or blog post that Vincent Slowski from Harris Bricken put out today on their listserv, talking about King and what his likely view would have been on the war on drugs, because he said it's well established that it was and is a war on minorities and people of color, and it's the antithesis of equality and justice, and it's still going strong. He goes on rated for marijuana convictions in 2020 was still at a shocking 350,150 people, despite there being other people who made millions or billions of dollars selling cannabis. In fact, I had a friend from Kansas who was recently arrested with a few ounces of cannabis, and it was a 21-year-old person of color, allegedly with cannabis on his person. And he's looking at 4 years now, and it's just crazy because he bought it allegedly from a dispensary where someone, some business type is making money, and it's just, King's legacy continues to inform our work, my work, and we just have the moral responsibility to make sure that the system that we are building here in Oregon doesn't perpetuate the same kind of inequality and injustice that's kind of a rule of the day in a lot of ways. Anyway, at a high level, the things that are going on in Oregon right now, there's talk about whether there's a max dose that should be imposed, whether there should be a unit of dosing, a standardized unit of dosing, whether there should be microdosing, and what that might look like. Whether, kind of what as we talked about last time, what the client to facilitator ratio ought to be in a way that maximizes safety while also minimizing costs. We will talk about training, and the training subcommittee had a conversation about contraindications, also kind of, just revisiting some of the stuff we talked about on our last episode. And then, of course, I always will talk a little bit about religious freedom as it pertains to Measure 109. So that's
important. Religious freedom is wildly important to discuss, especially in America. Kind of why we're here, kind of. But, so, John, I really love this microdosing topic and that it's so interesting to get into. So what we were chatting about before we started rolling here was there's difference of opinion in a few ways around, is microdosing really that risky, too risky for Oregon? I did a few prods around on my social medias and groups and everything, and people were pretty sure that Oregon should be including microdosing, but it sounds like that's not the clear opinion in Oregon. Can you give me a little idea of what's going on there?
Yeah, so I think, as far as I can tell, the main kind of resistance to it is just that this isn't, Measure 109 was sold to voters as a therapy program. It's fairly clear in the view of many watching this that it's not really therapy, whatever that even means. But it's kind of a clever workaround, and in fact, I'm not sure that that's actually how I would see that, because I think many people take microdosing as not just performance enhancement, although that is kind of one of the reasons people frequently give for microdosing. But actually, people microdose for depression, people microdose for anxiety, and I've heard of people microdosing for pain, and people who do that report good results. And so that's kind of, I say that to mention that I don't think that this is really just to the extent that Measure 109 might be about therapy, and I don't think that it necessarily is. I think to exclude microdosing excludes kind of a major therapeutic opportunity for Measure 109. So that's like the main issue that I can see it being, is just like, this makes people uncomfortable because it might be like too much too soon kind of thing. And then the product subcommittee, the research subcommittee is going to be addressing this week. On the menu or the agenda, there's a 30-minute discussion, a roundtable discussion that's scheduled on the benefits and risks of microdosing. So we can only guess.
It's a high risk sport. Yeah, now it's interesting, right? Like, what are the risks?
Yeah,
that microdose wasn't so micro. That's kind of a risk, totally. What else?
Yeah, I think that, in my view, is kind of the big one. I mean, there are some, there has been some suggestion that perhaps there could be kind of a hardening of heart valves with prolonged use. I think that's the main like actual medical concern that I've heard kind of indicated. And my understanding of that, and I'm not entirely sure, but my understanding of that is that most of that data comes from like context outside of psilocybin. And outside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing inside psilocybin that indicates that. So like, did we chat about this previously? Okay, so we did a macro dive on microdosing a couple weeks ago, me and Kyle, and we saw Amanda Fielding present and get drilled on this at Horizons in like 2019, 2018. And it was a good question. It's an authentic question because, there is some history here. So Amanda Fielding, for those who don't know, she's the head of Beckley Foundation. She's been a long time patron saint in a lot of ways of the movement. So thank you, Amanda. So she was taking massive amounts of LSD daily, probably for a decade, maybe more.
What do you mean by massive doses, Joe? Like what that actually means?
Nobody knows anything about dosing. And this was LSD, right? So there's similar concern between LSD and psilocybin around this thickening of the heart valve. And this is I forget the receptor site that triggers this, but this was happening a lot in fen-phen. Fen-phen was this PED or stimulant that a lot of athletes were using, and they were seeing heart failure, and they saw that the heart was changing due to massive doses of this substance they were consuming. So the fear is, similar receptor site activity, psilocybin, LSD to fen-phen, therefore there's a risk of the same thing happening, except wildly huge doses. I think many milligrams to many grams all the time. And then when we compare that to psilocybin LSD, the dose is so damn low, like micrograms, or maximum psilocybin dose of 20. You're probably going to be throwing up, but that's the maximum you could probably put it, right? So and you're not doing that every day, that's for sure. If you did, you're going to have some other situations come up. So Amanda Fielding suggested that the amount of LSD being used on her and this whole, LSD hippie culture would have proven that this was a concern, just based on the pure number of people consuming psychedelics. Interesting fact, we have more people consuming psychedelics now than we did then. So we're winning.
That's really interesting. I guess I'd never thought of that before, but it makes sense.
Yeah, right.
Today, yeah.
Yeah, we thank those Instagram drug dealers. Just kidding. Don't buy drugs on Instagram. Don't. Or any social media platform. So yeah, I've not heard it validated that this is a problem. It's a speculated problem, and there's no evidence to suggest that it will happen. There's evidence in regards to other drugs with similar receptor site activity there. So from some people's perspective, it's a reasonable concern. From my perspective, not a reasonable concern, especially if somebody's only doing this on occasion. if that person has some sort of cardiac activity and like, abnormal heart, perhaps there's something there that should be of concern. But yeah, that's kind of where I sit on it. There's not, I think this topic cooled down years ago, at least in the East Coast. Maybe Oregon's catching up. Kidding, Oregon. I'm kidding. I live in the Midwest. We're fine.
Yeah, and there's also like a lot of different protocols that would have wildly different kind of usage amounts. I think Stamets is 5 days on, 2 days off, and what is the Fadiman protocol like 1 day on, 2 days off? There could be
upwards of 3 days off, right? So
yeah.
There's so many protocols we don't even know about yet, right?
Yeah. And I come back, and I always keep bringing up the harm reduction perspective, but I think that's kind of what guides my thinking in a lot of this process is that, we treat people like adults, and we also understand that people are going to make these decisions regardless of whether it's within the safe container that is Measure 109 or whether it's outside of it. And I think from a policy perspective, Oregon really wants to or should want to bring as many people into the safety of the Measure 109 container as possible. If people are already microdosing, and if we can have those conversations between people who are microdosing and facilitators who know the risks, who know the protocols, who know the kind of the hazards to be aware of, and can give monitoring and feedback if there are things that start to emerge while they're doing it. I think ultimately that's a far safer, better, to the extent that safety concerns are a concern, wouldn't you want people doing it in the program rather than not doing it in the program where they don't have access to trained professional guidance?
The thing that I really hope for is that these programs don't push people to the margins and don't push people to black markets, which, unfortunately, it's an inevitable consequence of law anyway. Sorry, speaking of a lawyer, so sorry. But like when we make rules, people are going to break rules. In some rules, people are incentivized to break, and some, they're less so incentivized to break, right? And it's kind of like an economics discussion around incentives at that point, which is not really popular in this community, but it's important to understand incentives and, what are we doing and why, and what's the best way to do it to achieve the outcomes we want. And what are the outcomes we want? We want safety and healthy safety, healthiness, happiness. Probably. I'm not in Oregon, but I assume that's like some of the big things they want in Oregon from, help from the government, right? Is there anything else?
No, I think of it as just on the one hand, you want to maximize benefits and the opportunity for benefits, and you want to minimize harms. And it's that simple. And, I think all decisions that Oregon makes ought to be viewed through that lens of, does this minimize the ability to hit, benefits, or does it increase the potential for harms? And, those two things are kind of in tension sometimes. But actually, I don't really think they are in tension. I think the harms piece, I think we have to be mature about and realize that people are going to do this anyway. People are already doing this anyway. They're doing it more now than they were in the 60s, apparently.
Yeah, like it's always going to be cheap to grow mushrooms. There's no way you're going to make growing mushrooms and accessing mushrooms more expensive by offering legal avenues, especially in black market scenarios. Like, I think I told you about this, but in Canada, I talked to some Canadians recently, and they were saying, where were they? Near Edmonton, that mushroom prices, like garbage bags of mushrooms for $10, like very large bags of mushrooms. And it's a supply demand function that we have to account for. And like, if I can get this service for $900 or $100, why wouldn't I do that and avoid the legal option that's $5,000 plus? Or fake numbers, everybody. We don't actually even have an idea of what this is going to cost because the rules aren't firmed up yet. Early days. So yeah, like I'm a little bit economically cautious around drug use, right? Like I'll pay double for good MDMA for sure, and good acid, but I'm not necessarily going to go do that same kind of price jump just because it's inside the government. So we have to be aware of this, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying rules are worthless. I'm saying be aware of driving people to the black market. Yeah, that's all. That's the only thing I have to say on that.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't say it again.
Yeah. And, and it's like the black market, you're paying more because you think it's good, but, how do you know that until somebody that has taken it and verified that it's pure, but the first person that takes it, may not have a good result, and that's kind of, there's, I think you were saying
I'll give a quick plug for my friends at Oakland Hyphy. They actually started the psilocybin cup. So growers are submitting grow samples to this lab, and they do like, hey, these people have the strongest, or like, so right now they're just testing and publishing tryptamine content, but they could do other things like safety profiles and molds that you don't want, and quantity of mold, because that is going to be an issue in mushroom cultivation generally. Like, I know a grower that destroyed his whole massive, probably $200,000 crop because he had a little bit of contamination. He could have easily offloaded it, but he didn't, because he wanted to protect his customer base and, be within in integrity, I guess would be a way to put that. So interesting conversation. But yeah, like, right, there are avenues for black market to suggest quality, but I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch.
And it's not going to be as controlled or as tightly controlled as the white market will be, period. I mean, it's gonna, for every one guy that has that kind of integrity to discard, $200,000 of revenue or profit, how many people would just say, everyone
fair amount, man. That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm thankful I knew this person. Wait, yeah, it's on the record, whatever. So, but actually I never met them, thank God. I was gonna do like a full-on like documentary thing with the bag over the head to see the grow. I was like, yeah, it's probably not worth it, never mind. But yeah, it's true, right? Like, regulated markets I kind of prefer. Like, if I'm at a concert or like at a parking lot outside a concert, I'm not going to buy somebody's homebrew beer necessarily. Probably will not do that. I'll buy something cheap and regulated, that's a little more sensible, right? Or homemade soda or homemade kombucha. I'm not buying any of that. Like, why don't we think similarly about drugs? It's fascinating.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I think whatever the potential harms might be, even, we don't understand them. Us not understanding them is a result of this kind of absurdist placement of psilocybin on Schedule 1, despite, mountains of evidence that it doesn't belong there, making it really hard to do research. And it's unfortunate that we're in this position, but that's where we're at. And, gotta be just kind of make the best of it and recognize that people are doing this. And why wouldn't we want to allow them to have, expert guidance in the way that they do it? So, I think to me, it's that it really is as simple as that. So,
so the opposition is mainly about safety around this, like, theoretical heart issue.
We don't actually know. I think the clear opposition that's been articulated thus far has really been, I think exclusively in the realm of this is not what voters voted on. And, and to that I say, voting, like litigation, like legislation, is a sort of adversarial process. And there was one negative vote or one negative comment in the voters pamphlet. And, nobody, it was just silent as to it. And it wasn't, there would have been plenty of, if people would have disliked it, they could have, raised that in the voter pamphlet and said, raise that argument. And that could have been a material consideration for people when deciding how to vote on it. But it was just not part of it, and both sides equally could have talked about it prior to that. And now that it's law, that it just hasn't taken effect yet, the law seems to allow it pretty plainly, in my view. But
And what about like the science? So the science is a little immature around microdosing relative to other ways of using psychedelics. Has that come up?
So that's what I expect will come up this week in the research subcommittee. They've allowed 30 minutes to talk about it, which is kind of a long time for a board meeting. So I think we'll hear the scientific perspective on it, or the best argument about against it, I guess, is what I'm anticipating will happen. But we'll just see how that plays out and what comes up, and I'm sure we'll report about it next episode.
Yeah, cool, awesome. So whenever I get to be with you, John, we get to talk about politics and religion. So it's always fun. Should we start talking about religion first, and we can get into the rest of the stuff? So where are we around including churches?
Well, so it was really interesting. There was a series of public listening sessions that happened in mid-December. And I believe in the last 2 weeks, OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, has kind of published its formal, kind of response to it. The format of the listening sessions did not involve an answer from the state. It involved comment, and to the extent people asked questions, there was some representation that the OHA would respond later in writing. And so we got the writing on that. And the statement that the health authority made with respect to religion was that, that religions will be allowed and may obtain licensure to the extent that it's, provided that they comply with a regular set of rules and regulations around psilocybin. So that doesn't quite explicitly say that there won't be special accommodations for religion, but it does seem to say that there won't be. It does kind of suggest that. So that was my take on it. So that's kind of the major kind of development, I guess, in the last couple of weeks. There were a couple of speakers who were provisionally recommended by the one of the subcommittees to come and talk about religious use and religious protections, and those are going to be pending approval of the full board at the meeting on January 26th. So that remains to be seen whether they're approved and whether they present, but that so far I think every speaker has been approved. So we'll likely have some discussion in February or perhaps later on like formal presentation as an agenda item, I believe for the first time in the entire process in this process. So so that's progress, I think.
Totally. Yeah, that's really cool. Is there a major argument against including religious access here?
I've not heard a single person speak against it at all. I've heard nothing but support from a handful of board members, saying that this is a topic that is timely and needs to be addressed. It was almost, I take that back, there actually was something on the agenda for the most recent licensing subcommittee meeting. They had taken up the issue of the facilitator to client ratio, which we talked about in our last episode. And
this is a fun one.
Oh, this is a complicated issue. So previously, the licensing subcommittee had made a recommendation of 3 clients to 1 facilitator. That one facilitator can oversee and sort of facilitate up to 3 clients at one time, and that's the minimum ratio. They revised it, their recommendation. They changed it from 3 to 1 to it depends. And the it depends that they ultimately voted on and approved in their meeting was if it were going to be administered as part of subperceptual dose, as part of a microdose, that the ratio can be as high as 10 clients to one facilitator. And if there are perceptual doses, that it can be as high as 8 clients to one facilitator. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that per se. Just because it's up to doesn't mean it has to be that. And it depends on how intensive experiences people are having. But if people are having, higher dose sessions, they may want to do less than 8 to 1, because that's a lot of clients to not a lot of facilitators for a high dose session. What do you think, Joe?
So complicated, and there's no good rules here, and there's very little we can pull on. So if we go into ancient history, I'm sure there was like 2 to 4 facilitators per 20 people or something like that. In breath work, I would be right about on edge facilitating 4 people at once, like 2 people breathing at a time. This is breath work. Like I'd probably do that, but once you start going 5, 6, 7, 8, you don't have enough hands. Like you're not an octopus. Like you got to really have a handle on everything that's going on in the room, and stuff could really get out of hand. So for instance, I'm thinking I know of a person, an attorney. It was at Soul Quest. It's not John, in case anybody wanted to know. At Soul Quest, drink ayahuasca, and they were able to run away from the facilitators mid-session, and I find that really troubling. And they ended up far away in a dangerous situation. They ended up okay, unscathed, but who's to say that can't happen in Oregon? Like, thankfully, this person ended up in a cow field. What if they ended up in Walmart, or like getting arrested or something, right? Like, or hit by a car. Like, and you were talking earlier, John, about differentiating between outdoor and indoor sessions. I love that we're trying to develop some nuance here, but it's problematic because it's pretty easy to get outside when you're inside. Mushrooms don't make doorknobs not work anymore. So if your facilitator in a group of 4 or 5 is busy with somebody else, and you see the opportunity and you bolt, who's to say they're going to catch you and help you stay safe? So the intention, I think, John, is what? Safety and cost, like balancing safety and cost, right?
Exactly.
And that's the intent of this discussion in the Oregon situation. Yeah, like we had it when I was facilitating in Jamaica, we had plenty of facilitators. It was almost like 1 facilitator per 2 trippers, and there was a lot of people, and we still had issues containing people and keeping them safe. So if that's the intent and the object, that's tough. I err on the side of more like higher,
You'd rather having too many than not enough.
I don't know. Like I don't really want the state telling people what they can and can't do, but that's kind of what this project is, right? It's like letting the state tell us what we can and can't do. And so I have some fundamental issues there, but I'll get over that. But like, is it the government's business to get in the way of people from accessing these states? And by getting in the way, I mean putting financial barriers in the way, and like having these ratios too skewed in one direction makes it inaccessible. And that is something to be careful with. And I love this differentiation too between micro and macro, but it's like, I've seen some situations with people in 2 grams where it's really complicated, more so than you would expect on a 5 to 7 gram session.
I just think there's a lot of variables that would go into the optimal I mean, there's the variables that I see kind of affecting this number include kind of the facilitators, whether they're one or multiple of their familiarity with the group that they're facilitating. Like if this is a community center where it's regulars and they all know each other, that's very different than if it's a group of total strangers working together who so that might be one of the biggest, most important factors in arriving at the lowest ratio necessary. I think the activity that people are doing matters for that also. Tell me what you think about this, Joe, but I would almost predict that if a person's doing a blindfold, headphones, solo, inward-facing journey, they're a lot more likely to have some crazy buried trauma come up and have kind of a deep kind of anxiety experience than if there's some kind of programming where they're focused and if they're really doing like an inward focus, then I think there's a chance that stuff could come out that they're like the person's not really prepared to deal with because they've spent so many years kind of shoving it under. So that could be, versus if it's like say a musical performance, like there's going to be a kind of a social focus on a particular thing that may not let the stuff kind of give it as much of an occasion to arise. So there's like the actual activity versus like dancing and song and that sort of thing could there's a lot of different activities that could make a difference in that. There's how experienced or naive people are with psychedelics. If this is people's first trip, it might be different than if it's their 20th or 30th. There's something about
again, you never know.
Yeah,
your 30th could be a little scary.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to give away a little secret sauce, and I think this is helpful. So I've been thinking about group, and Kyle's been thinking about group for years and years and years. I come from a group orientation, and the best model, I think, for group sessions is something that looks like Groff breathwork. Interesting phrasing. It's something we'll get into later, John. But so you have facilitators, you have a certain number of dedicated, pretty experienced trainer or facilitators. You've got your group of people, and you pair up at the beginning, and you do tripper breather pairs or tripper sitter pairs. And that way, you have a lot more people in the room who aren't paid. It makes the facilitators go further. There's a lot of rules that go in place for the sitters, and they help contain if somebody's trying to break out and get into a dangerous situation. Perhaps like the group can help mitigate that risk. If I do group stuff in the future, this is probably the model I'm going to be operating with, because I feel like it's the lowest risk, lowest cost, and there's actually a massive benefit, I think, as the sitter, being there with the experiencer and caring for that person for an extended period of time, one-on-one. Like there's something magical there. And thinking biblically for a second, somehow, it's not usually my speed, but bearing witness, being seen, being held and supported, like those are big things. And so that's kind of where I go. But I know, what I say doesn't really matter too much, right? Maybe I'll have a little bit of influence, but I'm not trying to make this law either. I'm just saying it's a good way to manage a group and keep costs down.
Would you say, Joe, that those kind of considerations that you just raised are more applicable in we won't call it therapy, but in a inward-looking therapeutic type of spiritual intention?
Self-exploration, we'll call it.
Yeah,
totally. And it could be for therapy, it could be for self-exploration, it could be for religion. But if you're trying to treat chronic pain, that's probably not the best way to do it. If you're trying to treat various indications, probably not the best. And not all religious situations would look appropriate for that, right? Like there's ayahuasca churches where you're supposed to sing and dance the whole time. on quite a moderate dose, I might add, of ayahuasca, from what I understand. And I'm sure we can come up with many situations, right? Like I'm thinking like really fun, like evangelical, like church services, everybody's singing and dancing. I don't know if evangelical is the right word. It's probably not the right word. But you know, Pentecostal spirit type stuff coming through. And what's with me and all this Bible stuff? I usually try to bury that deep, John. So
safe space here.
Yeah, right. YouTube and Twitter, you got my back, right? So yeah. So I can imagine a lot of contexts that wouldn't work that way too. Yeah, like long and short, that's all I was trying to say.
Yeah, like especially if it's a more social type of setting, that might not be, you know, if it's a.
You mentioned Zendo earlier.
Yeah, so I think
that's a fucking great model. Like that's a no-brainer almost.
Yeah, I think of it, you know, especially for more social type events or service centers. The question kind of can be phrased: how big does the Zendo tent need to be for how large of a crowd? And I think, and maybe also how big a dose. So I think if there were a tier of this big of a crowd with X dose, you could have, I mean, the ratio could be based on that. And I think as you scale and get larger and larger groups, there's two main kind of considerations to think about. One is potentially worrisome client-on-client interactions, or the effect that one client can have on other folks, whether or not there's interactions there. So to have some kind of place where they can be, you know, and they probably at that point want support and want to be, I would imagine most of the time, removed from the situation. But also kind of this mathematical phenomenon, like the average of large numbers. So like if you have a small group size, there's a lot more variance in that, and it's a lot more likely to deviate from the average. Like if we knew what the perfect actual optimal facilitator client ratio was, like scientifically, and you had a small group, the group is likely to have higher or lower needs than the average. Whereas if you get a really large group, it's not likely to deviate that much. So if you're on a small group size, you may need a little more than is strictly speaking required. Or if you have a large number, you might be able to kind of stick it closer, the number closer to the actual mathematical optimal average. But we obviously don't know that yet, but you know, I think we can actually learn a lot from the experience of like the festival setting, where right. You know, where Zendo harm reduction tents have been helping people for quite a few years now.
Quite a few years. That's a really good point. Yeah, and there's other organizations like Cosmic Care doing great work in a similar vein as well. So it's nice to know about this stuff, and it's helpful to have kind of other examples to pull from. What do you people like to say? Precedent. Yeah.
Stevens.
So yeah, like this is a really important distinction, right? Like this is such a wild project for citizens who aren't exactly perfect experts. Like who is a perfect expert? But you know, like this is a really complicated project. All these people in the advisory committee have on their shoulders here. I don't envy it. I would probably be having regular meltdowns because I wasn't getting my way, but that's why I'm not in politics.
Oh, well, we'll just say that there's a lot of passion in the group, and there's a lot of passion in the public, and this is big stuff, and we all care deeply about it, you know, and we hope to be gracious during the process. We got started talking about facilitators because you asked if religion, how that's going, and I was in the process of mentioning that it did make it onto the agenda at that same licensing subcommittee meeting, that perhaps the licensing or the facilitator to client ratio would be kind of up to the religious organization to decide kind of for themselves was the way it was written in the writing and like the proposed motions that were circulated before the meeting. But after a lengthy discussion and arriving at the ratios 10-to-1 for subperceptual and 8-to-1 for perceptual, I think it kind of got swept under the rug. That the issue of whether a religious institution could have a different kind of way of doing that, where there is strong group cohesion, where there is massive experience amongst the people, they can be self-policing. I actually talked with Jonathan Goldman again here pretty recently.
Oh, cool.
Spiritual leader of the one of the Santo Daime churches in Oregon.
And he helped bring it through the federal courts, the Supreme Court, right?
The Ninth Circuit, they got up there and back. And he said that in 25 years of doing ceremony, they've never once had a situation that they're unable to resolve internally. And they also have a rule, as I understand it, that everybody—
sounds spooky. But I like it. It's cool.
We can handle. Yeah, right.
Desert's got a lot of holes in it. Yeah, like that's
right. But they've been able to, they have 4 layers of protection, starting with the guardians, who are kind of elders of the community, who are in a kind of a safety, safe harm reduction kind of role. And then there was like a second layer of like master guardian, who's kind of like on the background. And then if they can't handle it, then there's like more senior members of the community that are in ceremony that have served as guardians, and they jump in. And if all else fails, then the people leading the ceremony jump in. And with all of these layers of protection, they've been able to handle and contain and mitigate harm. I think, as is my understanding, in basically every ceremony they've led in 2.5 decades of doing it, despite the fact that literally my understanding is every person in every ceremony always takes at least some amount of daime, which others call ayahuasca. So to say that then a religious institution who has safety at heart and the well-being of its congregants like at heart is incapable of doing anything other than 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 is kind of a silly notion. I actually have been thinking about it a little bit, and am almost a little bit concerned that if religious institutions have this pass that secular institutions don't, particularly with respect to the facilitator client ratio. We talked about this quite a bit in the last episode, so I'll summarize it super briefly here, but I'd encourage, if you didn't watch the last one and you're interested in this topic, to go back and watch it. But the best way that the state can actually keep costs manageable is by providing flexibility in that ratio, because it's going to be one of the most expensive components of psilocybin services, and the only one that can't be really worked around, because
the people on site, you mean?
The staff, staff that are paid and trained and probably making $30 and $50 an hour is my estimate. But the fewer of those you can require, the better. But I think it should be part of the facilitator scope of practice to be able to exercise their own judgment of what a safe amount is. And I think it's probably appropriate for there to be some flexibility there, provided that they can actually defend their decisions. I mean, if they say that they're comfortable like facilitating a large group by themselves, I think we entrust them with their minds, and we put a lot of trust in our facilitators.
In a way, you can think about this. You can compare it to like brain surgery, open heart surgery. Like, I hate to go there, but it is in a way that serious. That I deflate so many of my arguments when I go there. So I have a hard time going there. That's tricky. So back to your Santo Daime thing real quick. I just want to mention, like, I joined a group many moons ago, probably 12 years ago. It will remain nameless, and
well outside of the statute of limitations, of course.
I'm still dues current. I give them money still. But I had to sign a thing when I joined that I wouldn't sue any other members. So I would not like engage in any kind of like civil suit. I forget if I signed away my right to a criminal law, like criminal charges or not, but I might have. So like religions theoretically might consider that kind of a thing, but having really good frameworks, this group I'm a part of still is quite problematic. And they have not handled things so well. So there's examples of religions not doing well, even outside of the psychedelic space. I'll add that it is not a psychedelic group explicitly.
Wow.
Yeah. So
so the concern that I've been like, I kind of started to think about it, like if we have religious groups that have, the ability to have a really low cost option based on their experience, their sincerity, based on the fact that they really are self-managed and self-regulating and that kind of thing. And we kind of reduce the facilitator client ratio to a minimum based on those factors. If we do it in a religious context, but not in like a secular context, then what that results in is people going to religious ceremony when they may not really belong there. They may belong in a more secular kind of situation. So I think it is important that they're provided like that in both contexts. I wouldn't want let's say if I'm a church member, I wouldn't want someone coming to my church and kind of being a part of my ceremony unless they were there because they wanted to do it for the right reasons, not just because it's the cheapest game in town. And furthermore, with respect to the Matthew Johnson article that I am fond of referring to, Pitfalls of Psychedelic Medicine, he warns about, given the suggestibility of people in psychedelic states, you want to be really careful about the kind of symbolism and the imagery and things that you project, because it's really not appropriate to give a person seeking medical care like Buddha images or like Native American kind of that's really appropriative anyway, but to kind of subtly try to like suggest that they are like a Buddhist, there's those kinds of considerations that are more.
Well, not to mention somebody getting spooked by alien religious iconography. But this is a topic I take quite seriously. Actually, I had a lot of negative reactions to that article from Johnson because in our preparation for breathwork type sessions, we like to give people a really good idea of what could happen. What's the range of possibilities of what you might experience? And this is a topic people don't necessarily love because it, in a way, primes them for it. But it's also how do you do informed consent? Like NYU, Hopkins, they're going to say, well, we have this 18-page document that we walk you through, but it's like, is that actually informed consent? Like, what happens when you start giving birth to yourself and having sex with yourself at the same time? Like, that's not really something you can describe very well. So a lot of this stuff you have to use language saying like, the numinous, like, yeah, that's a great term. Like, it's the things that you can't really put words to, and there's a lot of it. And in fact, a lot of this material and a lot of these experiences are, I don't know.
So your issue with that article was primarily that informed consent's kind of impossible, and
that's part of it. It also shoots down a big portion of the Groff model, which is telling these stories about the history of the stuff, telling us stories about experiences that others have had, letting people know, hey, here's a very large range of what could happen for you, because you need to know this. You come in, like, all you do is watch Seinfeld and you've never left New York City, right? All of a sudden you're in, Bellevue having 5 dried gram equivalent of mushrooms administered in pure psilocybin. And what, how are you ready? How are you ready for that? You're not. The amount of earth-shattering revelations you might have are pretty astronomical. So I err on the side of communicating more than communicating less. Maybe Matt Johnson's talking about using religious language, like, you know, saying things like right relationship, hinting at Buddhism, or like, you know, the thing is, you meet people where they are, you tell them the stories that you think they need to know or hear. Hopefully they hear them, and then you're in a better position. Yeah, I don't know. Like that's a whole thing. Kyle and I dissected that quite a bit on the podcast when that came out.
Interesting. Yeah, I read that article to really just caution that, given people's suggestibility, and you know, that if somebody comes seeking kind of a medical container, that they not be exposed to religious symbolism, or you know, that religious symbolism is inappropriate in a medical context. And
we come from a transpersonal frame, so like anything we talk about to Matt Johnson could be seen as religious, right? Like anything that's spooky or transpersonal, he's quite a behaviorist rationalist. So like, you know, that's where I disagree with him. But it's an open debate still, I guess. He's got all the money, I don't. So
he's definitely got some letters behind his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
cool. So 3 minutes, John. What do we want to get into?
Oh gosh, 3 minutes. There was a talk of max dose, just for people's benefits. I don't think it made it onto YouTube, but we did an episode on this on December 20th, the so-called lost episode of Eyes on Morgan. But essentially, we discussed at length the issue of max dose. And I think for the conversation that's happening in Oregon today about it, it seems like there is support for not imposing one, for good reason. I think, you know, namely, you know, harm reduction, and also just variability in people's metabolism makes it kind of a very delicate discussion that doesn't really lend itself to hard limits. But I think,
Agreed.
but so when they talk about the dosing rules, there was this kind of, you know, suggestion, start low, go slow, meaning you start with a low dose and you build up until you find your high dose. And I completely understand that being like a prudent, you know, dip your toes in the water before plunging in kind of thing. But the equity considerations that I think that implicates is that, you know, first off, people are going to be spending thousands of dollars, most likely, to travel here, and they may only get one experience. They may not, a lot of people won't want to, after you do psilocybin one day, you may not want to come back and do it again, you know, for years, potentially. But, you know, I think it's rare that people want to do it multiple days consecutively. I mean, that's of course, there are people who do, but I think a lot of people will maybe not want to do that. And with this, if the hard rule is start low and go slow, you know, you're gonna require people to take time and pay considerably, like twice or three times as much money before they can dial in their experience to the level that they were hoping to achieve. And I think you could probably kind of attain the same safety, you know, kind of safeguards much more cheaply if booster doses are allowed. I haven't heard any talk about that, but if, you know, if start low, go slow refers to the initial dose and you wait till the peak time. And, you know, I mean, I think it's, what is it? The Secret Chief, is that the name of the book?
Off.
Yeah. You know, he talked about booster doses as being kind of a standard part of the practice. I think it's pretty, you know, well, like, what do you think about that, Joe? Start low, go slow, booster doses.
It's worked for me. but I don't know if it's like something we should try to universalize, right? Because your concerns are quite valid. We need to be really, really, really concerned with the economical feasibility here. I would say, like, we're kind of at time, but like the idea of, do we maybe put some provisional rules in place that are maybe extra cautious for a year or two, with the plan to revisit all of these, implementing all of our learnings from a year or two of practice. I think that's probably smart to have kind of an iterative model here, with a lot of citizen involvement. I don't necessarily want Compass or like a big operator coming in and bullying, but I would like it to be a lot more democratic. Yeah, like I'm okay with big operators being there. I just don't want them to like take over the political process.
I think that's the concern. Yeah. Yeah. So I think for cost control, I'm not saying like start low, go slow is like a horrible idea. I think it's a really good idea. I think it's prudent, but I'm also just very mindful of the fact this is going to be very, very expensive.
Yeah, if everything was free, no worries. Yeah, of course. And everybody is rich. Cool. But
no, it would be nice, since all psilocybin under Measure 109 has to be purchased in front of the facilitator, possessed with the supervision of the facilitator, and consumed with the supervision of the facilitator. I would like to see, with respect to the booster doses, a model where the person could pre-purchase more psilocybin than they might need. So they're not making those purchasing decisions while under the influence. Like, they've already kind of set aside, up to this amount, and it's agreed upon. And if in session they say, okay, like I could use a little more, it provides some kind of dialing it in the first experience, or whatever number of experiences a person's had. I just think it allows some flexibility mid-session, and as long as it's governed by informed consent and purchase, all that stuff being done in advance with clear guidelines, I think that resolves the concerns that I foresee. But
I want to read a couple of these comments from Facebook, John, and just we can do a quick reaction to them.
Yeah. I also want to quickly talk about
Mhm.
contraindications before that, but
all right, go for that first. Let's see where we can squeeze that in.
So that there's another major discussion point that came up in the training subcommittee over the last couple of weeks. They, and just for people who didn't watch, we kind of discussed this issue at length in last week's or 2 weeks ago's episode. And so the things I want to say about contraindications is that so there was a proposal that there be a they didn't call it a two-tiered system. They tried to frame it in terms of the scope of practice. And they suggested that perhaps the scope of practice of a facilitator should be somewhat governed by the amount of education or licensing that they have. And that the lowest tier of licensure, like the core, basic level facilitator, not be really allowed to serve people who have medical or psychiatric kind of issues that are, contraindicated or identified as risk factors. I think this is a major equity consideration. I think downstream, there's a lot of consequences to a system where everybody who has certain medical indications or risk factors in their file has to go to a more expensive facilitator. First off, it kind of segregates them, and it makes like a class or a group of clients who are going to only be able to, first off, they're going to be excluded from the normal, like people are going to go to a retreat together, and they're going to have to like not be with their friends. They're going to have to, either be rejected, at some point in the process, or they're going to have to lie in order to be with their friends. And I think the solution to a situation like that is if all facilitators are trained to deal with the riskier, kind of clients, then when somebody does misreport on their screening form and their client information form, then they'll be prepared to deal with it rather than try to like boot the client. I think there will probably be a lot of folks who don't accurately report medical conditions in order to get through. And if there's a financial incentive to do so, I think that's going to be all the more prevalent. So I think the solution to that, in my view, is just that all facilitators get trained to deal with all types of folks, and and that's kind of one of the core pieces of this. I also think that one of the most important parts of the client facilitator relationship is that it has to be a transparent relationship. And I think the policies that we make on this really need to encourage that to be an open, transparent, honest relationship, both from the client to the facilitator and the facilitator to the client. If the client has some risk factors and they know that they may be disqualified or maybe sent to a different person, they're less likely going to explain it. So I just think that the integrity of that relationship is really crucial. And to the extent that the policies that Oregon makes can encourage an honest and transparent relationship there, I think that's going to be better for everyone. And a two-tiered system doesn't really promote that. So that was what I wanted to say.
Sounds like you're hinting at apartheid state kind of dynamics a little bit, and that's tough. It's not exactly a great analogy, but it's almost.
Well, you can see the reason behind it, because I mean there are riskier clients, and you may want special training for that. But I think the only practical, equitable solution is to make everyone take the training and make everybody qualified to help everyone.
Is there much discussion right now around insurance and liabilities?
I'm
thinking in particular towards like the facilitators, because there will be some fallout from this, right? And who pays for it?
Yeah. On the official level, there has been relatively little discussion about it. It has come up, but there's not been really a solution proposed for what to do about that. I have heard of a couple of organizations now that are kind of trying to jump into the industry and provide insurance. And I'm not sure if that's at the facilitator level, at the service center level, at the products level, or all of the above. But I'm just concerned it's going to be outrageously expensive. But but that is, the board hasn't had much discussion of that yet.
Well, board, if you made it this far into the video, please consider how is insurance going to work. This is actually one of the crux issues for the most optimal way to bring this kind of modality to the people. Dan, the fancy footwork there linguistically, but yeah, like we want to bring this to a lot of people. A lot of people need a lot of help, and how do we keep the people doing the work safe? And insurance is a big part of that. All right, cool. Anything else before I read these comments?
Nope, go right for it. Thanks, Joe.
You got it. Let's see what I got here. So we've got Carrie Dixon. This is an easy one. It is a complex set of issues in working out terms to use or not, whether or not so much is purely secular, but avoiding the nature of spirit revealing in experiences in a medical context. So I think this is a commentary around like, how are we feeling about like, are we prepping people for when spirit shows up? Eric Davis had a really good turn of phrase around this a while ago, saying something along the lines of it's kind of a play on the Mike Tyson quote, like everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face kind of deal. But it's like all of a sudden God shows up in the room. What do you do? Like you have no framework for that. You have no idea how to deal with the numinous because everything's biographical and normal. But it's like, it's not. Shit gets really weird really quickly. And, you know, maybe things are biographical and, you know, manageable for the first 20 sessions you facilitate, but that 21st one, like, there's no saying. There's no saying. Yeah, and there is harm in making the transpersonal biographical to the experiencer. Because in a way you're profaning the sacred to that person. They had this like massive experience. I'm like, oh no, but how does this relate to that you know, when you peed your pants in preschool? Like no, doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, you know, we have to be really careful here. You know, I'm sure I pissed some people off with that comment. Sorry. Next comment from Facebook, from Bruce. My experience from microdosing 4-ACO DMT was impressive. 4-ACO DMT, I believe, is like a synthetic psilocybin, is what people call it. I've not consumed any before.
Is that on the list of things that may be turned in Schedule 1 here?
I don't remember. I'm sure it's Schedule 1 already, but who knows? Yeah, that was quite the article from Harris Bricken. That's what it's called. Yeah. I like the image, just big WTF. It's like tone deaf. All right, I did a 3-on, 1-off regimen using a 4 to 7 milligram window and never going above 7 milligrams. I weighed each dose 3 times for accuracy and to keep it in true micro form. My results were very obvious, ranging from greater clarity and better short-term memory to a decrease in my chronic back pain. Common report. It was purchased from the company that provided it for Hopkins in their studies conducted a few years back. So this person's pretty sure they got a high quality product. Amazing. I miss being in the position financially to acquire more. In his opinion, it's an excellent substance. Thank you again, Dr. Albert Hoffman. Happy belated birthday, Dr. Hoffman. And I hope for its legal status to change nationwide here in the US. Thanks for letting me share. Yeah, no worries, Bruce. That's good stuff. Yeah, it's quite the situation, right? We've got all these compounds, and as soon as they come out, they get scheduled. It's super fun. I'm hoping to help influence that at the federal level through my work at Psychedelic, on the board of directors for Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, led by Melissa Lavasani. So hopefully we can cut this shit out long term, but we'll see.
Yeah, I saw you out on the board. Congrats. Seems like a really great place to do a lot of good.
I hope so. I'm gonna have to do a lot of growing up to play nice in the sandbox with the other children in Washington, DC. But let's see what we can make happen and see if we can improve some stuff. Yeah, cool. Any comments on that microdosing comment?
Not really.
Yeah. Cool. All right. And are we good for now, John?
That's all I got. I think we will be picking up the religious topic more substantially here very soon. But yeah, thanks, Joe. I really appreciate Psychedelics Today creating this platform for these conversations to just bring public awareness and public involvement into Oregon's process.
Happy to help. It's an amazing experiment Oregon decided to undertake, and let's see how it shakes out. And yeah, hopefully we can maximize good here. John, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm a consultant with Psychedelics Go, and you can reach me at jdennis, DENNIS, at psychedelicsgo.com.
Outstanding. John, this is amazing. Do it again in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.